The hum of the hallway lights buzzed above me as I stood outside my son's door, hearing him whisper about the inheritance he thought I'd never live to spend. Still, I kept my hand steady on the frame, letting that faint electric buzz drown out the shaking in my chest. As the sound deepened, it felt like it was tracing every lie he'd ever told me. While I listened, I realized the buzzing wasn't just in the lights. It was in me, waking something I'd ignored for years. The same low hum carried the truth. Love can't survive where greed lives. That's when I decided, if he wanted my death so badly, he'd first have to face my living. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. Frank heard the voices before he saw anyone. They drifted around the side of the house, carried on the cold, late autumn air. He'd only come out to the garage to find an old toolbox, something to keep his hands busy while he waited for his next doctor's appointment. Instead, he found himself standing just inside the half-open garage door, the metal cool beneath his fingertips as he held it, unseen in the shadows. "I'm telling you, man, it's just a matter of time." That was Logan, his son, confident, relaxed. The tone was familiar, but the words were wrong. There was a casual ease in his voice that made Frank's neck tighten. One of the other men chuckled. Tires crunched on the driveway gravel as someone shifted their weight. Frank stayed still. He could see shoes through the gap at the bottom of the door, 3 pairs. Logan's expensive sneakers, another guy's work boots, a third in scuffed loafers. Then Logan laughed. That short, sharp laugh he'd picked up in his 30s when money started to mean more than time. "He's dying anyway," Logan said, like he was talking about some distant stranger. "The money's basically ours." The words slid into Frank's ears like ice. For a second, his brain refused to line them up into a sentence he understood. He just stared at the faint rectangle of daylight at the bottom of the garage door, feeling his heartbeat move from his chest into his throat. Dying anyway. Ours. He swallowed, suddenly aware of every breath, every ache in his joints, the lingering heaviness from the tests and the hospital smell that clung to his jacket. Logan kept going. "We just have to ride this out, be patient. The house, the savings, pension, like all of it, will finally have some breathing room." The other men murmured, one of them low whistling in approval. Frank stayed frozen in place. This couldn't be right. Maybe he'd misheard. Maybe Logan was talking about someone else, some client, some older relative, but there was no one else. It was his house, his pension, his breathing room they were standing on. He pressed his palm harder against the side of the garage door to steady himself. The rough metal bit into his skin. Tara's voice floated in next, smooth and bright, like it always was when she wanted something. "We're counting on that inheritance," she added. "Honestly, if it doesn't come through soon," she laughed lightly, "well, I guess we'll just have to start selling organs." The group laughed with her. Frank's stomach turned. Counting on it. Like it was a paycheck running late. Like his entire life's work, sleepless shifts at the firehouse, missed birthdays, his knees going bad from climbing too many stairs in turnout gear, was just some number they'd already penciled into their budget. He saw Tara in his mind's eye, the way she had leaned over the kitchen counter last week, palms pressed together, eyes shining with what he'd thought was concern. "How are you feeling, Frank? Really?" she asked. "You're not getting worse, are you?" Then she'd glanced quickly at Logan, and Frank had assumed she was just scared, family scared. The kind of scared people get when they realize life ends for everyone eventually. Now with that laugh, with those words, counting on the inheritance, it all replayed in a different light. Outside, Logan's voice dropped lower, conspiratorial. "Just don't say anything to him about money right now. He gets all sensitive. We just keep visiting, keep being there for him. Once the doctors are done, it'll work itself out." Once the doctors are done. Frank's jaw clenched. He felt suddenly aware of his own age, the stiffness in his knuckles, the way his back ached if he stood still too long. But beneath that, something else rose slowly, hot and unfamiliar, a burn that wasn't physical. Betrayal had a temperature, he realized. It was somewhere between fever and fire. "Come on," Tara said lightly. "Let's go. I've got to get back and check some listings. There's this place near the water I've been eyeing. I swear, the second things are finalized." Their voices started to drift away, footsteps moving across the driveway. A car door opened, then another. The engine turned over. Frank stepped back from the garage door as the car pulled away. He didn't lift it up. He didn't call out. He just stood there in the dim, oil-scented quiet of his garage, feeling like someone had taken his ribcage apart and rearranged everything inside. The silence after their departure felt louder than the conversation itself. He finally lifted the door, the mechanism rattling as daylight spilled in. The driveway was empty. The street was calm, leaves skittering along the curb in the wind. It was an ordinary afternoon in an ordinary suburban neighborhood, and yet everything felt tilted. He walked back inside the house slowly, shutting the door behind him. The familiar creak of the floorboard in the hallway, the framed photos on the walls. Logan at 8 with missing front teeth. Logan in his graduation cap. Logan holding a beer at a barbecue. Each one stared back at him with a kind of cruel irony. He moved past them all without touching a single frame. That night the house felt different. Frank sat at his kitchen table with the lights off, a mug of coffee cooling untouched in front of him. The only glow came from the under-cabinet light above the sink and the faint blue of the stove clock. The furnace kicked on, then off. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once and stopped. He replayed the scene again and again. Logan at 12, crying after striking out at baseball, Frank's hand on his shoulder. Logan at 19, calling for money when his car broke down. Logan at 23 showing up on the porch with Tara, asking if they could stay just until we figure things out. Every sacrifice, every second chance, every small pride in the man his son was supposed to become, now sat next to that one sentence: he's dying anyway. The money's basically ours. He thought of the hospital, of Dr. Grant's calm voice telling him they were still waiting on results, of the way Logan had hardly looked at him in the waiting room, more interested in his phone than in the man hooked up to monitors. Maybe, he thought, I'm the only one who thought this family was something more than numbers on paper. An urge rose in his chest to pick up the phone and call Logan, to demand an explanation, to shout, to ask, "Is that really how you see me?" A countdown timer with a bank account attached. His fingers actually curled around his phone. Then he stopped. He pictured Logan's face if confronted, surprised, defensive, maybe indignant. He heard the excuses forming already. "Dad, you heard it wrong. We were just joking. You know we love you, you're overreacting." The script was almost too easy to predict, and it only made the betrayal feel deeper. Frank exhaled slowly and set the phone down. If they thought he was dying, if they thought the money was basically already theirs, then they weren't just careless. They were confident, comfortable in their expectation of his absence. He stared at the dark screen of his phone, feeling something in him harden, settle. No, he decided, not yet. He wouldn't give them the chance to spin it, to sweet-talk him, to paint over their greed with concern. For the first time in a long time, he would listen more than he spoke, watch more than he trusted. Frank pushed the phone a few inches away from him and sat back in his chair, the old wood creaking under his weight. If his son already saw him as gone, then he'd use that. He'd stay quiet. He'd let them believe whatever they wanted and see just how far they were willing to go. The exam room felt colder than usual as Frank waited on the paper-covered table, the thin gown tugging at his shoulders. He watched the clock blink its slow digital march, feeling every second stretch longer than the last. His heartbeat tapped a nervous rhythm beneath his ribs. He had come prepared for bad news, but not for the uncertainty that had been gnawing at him since yesterday's painful discovery. When Dr. Evelyn Grant entered, her expression held a seriousness that made Frank brace himself. She greeted him warmly but without the false cheer doctors sometimes used. Sitting across from him with her tablet, she reviewed his results carefully before meeting his gaze. Her voice was steady, deliberate, almost grounding as she told him that his condition was treatable, manageable, and far from the terminal fate he had quietly feared. Relief hit him first, sharp and unexpected, but it tangled immediately with something heavier. The words he had overheard outside his garage echoed again, coiled tightly around the moment. Dr. Grant caught the shift in his expression and leaned in, concern sharpening her features. When she asked what was bothering him, Frank hesitated only a moment before telling her everything he'd heard his son and daughter-in-law say. Dr. Grant's reaction was immediate and fierce. Outrage flickered across her face, not theatrical but protective in a way that startled Frank. She had seen families take advantage of vulnerable patients before, she told him, and the pattern was unmistakable. What Logan and Tara had said wasn't a misunderstanding. It was entitlement, sharpened by the belief that Frank was already halfway gone. She urged him firmly to safeguard himself legally before anyone tried to act on that assumption. Frank admitted something then, something he hadn't spoken aloud before. He had always planned to leave Logan everything: the house, the accounts, even the old truck sitting in the driveway. It was what fathers did, he'd thought. You worked, you saved, you passed along what you built. Saying it now, though, felt strangely hollow. Dr. Grant listened, her face softening with understanding but never losing its steady, protective edge. She asked him to pause before finalizing anything, to wait, to watch, to see who Logan became when he believed his father's time was limited. It wasn't about punishment, she explained, but clarity. People revealed themselves most honestly in moments of perceived advantage. If Logan showed genuine love, patience, decency, then Frank could revisit his plans. But if greed drove him, then rushing a decision would only hand him undeserved power. Frank felt something settle inside him, an anchor maybe, or the start of a resolve he hadn't known he possessed. She was right. Confronting Logan now would only warn him. Silence, on the other hand, would give Frank the chance to see the truth without distortions. He nodded slowly, absorbing the new reality, the unexpected permission to protect what he had earned. He realized he didn't owe blind trust to anyone anymore. Before leaving, he scheduled additional appointments, more checkups, more monitoring, anything that would create a clear record of his mental and physical stability. Dr. Grant entered each visit carefully into the system, ensuring no one could claim he was confused or declining. For Frank, the appointments weren't just medical. They were time bought intentionally, space carved out so he could observe the people who claimed to care for him. As he walked out through the quiet hallway, the scent of disinfectant trailing behind him, the truth pressed in with new weight. He wasn't dying. Not yet, not by any medical measure. But something else had shifted permanently. The way he looked at his own family. The sliding doors opened, letting in a gust of cold outside air, and Frank stepped into it with a steadiness he hadn't felt in days. He paused on the curb, watching cars move through the parking lot, each engine hum grounding him in the present. The world hadn't changed, but he had. Logan thought he was fading, but now Frank understood the advantage in letting that belief stand. He exhaled, slow and deliberate, feeling both wounded and newly awake. Whatever came next, he would face it with open eyes and guarded trust. He continued. The knock came late Saturday morning, 3 sharp taps that didn't sound like the mailman. Heard from the living room, it carried a nervous edge that made Frank set his coffee down mid-sip. His knees complained as he pushed himself up, but his chest was calm. The real ache was somewhere higher, behind his ribs. Since the appointment with Dr. Grant, the fear of dying had eased, but something colder had taken its place. He opened the door. On the porch stood Logan, hands spread in a practiced hey there gesture, and beside him Tara, clutching a small camera like a prop from a lifestyle blog. "Dad, hey," Logan said, stepping forward before Frank could answer. "We were just in the neighborhood, thought we'd check on you." Frank glanced past them at the street. Their car sat at the curb, parked crooked like they'd stopped fast. Tara lifted the camera and offered a bright, glossy smile. "That okay?" she asked. "I thought we could get a few pictures. You know, precious last moments together." Frank felt the phrase hit like a physical shove, but he only tightened his grip on the doorknob. "Come on in," he said. "Door S not charging admission yet." They laughed politely, just a beat too loud, and brushed past him into the hallway. In the living room, Tara immediately started arranging the space like a set, straightening a pillow, angling a lamp, nudging his framed firefighting photo toward the light. "Sit down, Frank," she chirped. "Your chair is perfect. The light here is so soft, it's flattering." He lowered himself into the recliner, leather sighing under his weight, and watched her through narrowed eyes as she stepped back and raised the camera. "Smile," she sang. "We want to remember you just like this." "For who?" Frank almost asked, but he pulled the corners of his mouth upward and let the flash burn the moment white. Logan dropped onto the couch, jeans creasing, knee bouncing with restless energy. "So, he began. "How have you been feeling since the tests? Any changes?" Frank described the basics. The medication, the diet, the follow-up visits Dr. Grant had scheduled. Each time he added detail, Logan's eyes slid briefly toward the hallway where Frank's home office. She sat, door half closed. Tara clicked, checked the screen, nodded, then checked again, as if the camera were more fragile than the man in front of her. When Frank paused to sip his coffee, their patience evaporated. "So anyway," Logan cut in quickly, "have you given any thought to, getting everything organized?" He tried to coat the word with casual concern, but greed sat underneath like a stain. "Organized how?" Frank asked, keeping his tone neutral. Logan said, shrugging. "Your paperwork, the will, beneficiary stuff, all that boring legal junk so you don't have to stress. We just want things to be clear when, the time comes." Tara lowered the camera half an inch, watching him closely while pretending not to watch at all. Frank felt the old instinct to explain, to reassure, rise up in his throat and forced it back down. "I've been thinking about it," he said. "No decisions yet. That kind of thing takes time." Tara's smile flickered, a brief crack in the glossy surface. "We just don't want you to leave it too late," she said. "People wait and then it gets messy and lawyers take everything. Family should benefit, not strangers." Frank let that hang in the air, studying both of them. He pictured Megan next door, paralegal files spread across her kitchen table, and decided she'd be the first person he talked to. "I'll talk to someone when I'm ready," he said. "For now, I'm still weighing my options." There was the smallest shift in Logan's posture, a tightening around his mouth, quickly smoothed over. "Hey, it's your call," Logan replied. "We're just looking out for you." Behind the practiced concern, Frank heard impatience scratching at the door, eager, ugly, barely contained. Tara's phone vibrated. She glanced down, irritation flashing before she slipped the smile back on like lipstick. "We should let you rest today," she said softly anyway. Frank nodded, mind with Megan. Megan sat at her small kitchen table, laptop open, the gray afternoon pressing against the window above the sink. Frank's house was visible across the narrow street, porch light still on, a soft reminder of the conversation they'd had the night before about his son's strange visit. She took a breath, turned back to the laptop, and logged into the county records portal, fingers moving with the calm precision she used every day at the firm. Typing in his full name felt strangely intrusive, but she did it anyway, watching the spinning icon until a list of documents appeared and one line made her stomach drop. "In the matter of the estate of Franklin J. Mercer, draft WILL submission, status, rejected." Her hand tightened around the edge of the table as she clicked it open, and within seconds she was staring at a formatted document naming Logan Mercer as sole heir to every asset Frank owned. Near the bottom sat the notary block, Tara's name printed neatly beside her commission number, followed by language claiming Frank had been too weak to sign in his usual manner and needed her to help finalize his wishes. Megan zoomed in on the signature, comparing it to the one she had seen on neighborhood association forms. The sweeping F and confident tail on the K were missing, replaced by a shaky imitation, and at the top of the file, a red notice read rejected. Signature mismatch. She didn't swear often, but now a quiet curse slipped out before she grabbed her phone and dialed Frank, eyes never leaving the screen while the call rang through and his tired hello finally answered. "Megan?" he asked. She could hear dishes clinking faintly in the background. She told him she was looking at county records, that there was a draft will filed in his name, that it had been rejected, and that it gave everything without condition to Logan alone. Then carefully, she explained Tara's role as notary, the claim that he had been too frail to sign properly, the implication that they were simply helping a dying old man put his affairs in order. On the line, Frank went so quiet she thought the call had dropped, until she heard a rough breath and the scrape of his chair. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded smaller and somehow heavier, like someone trying to stand up with a weight on their chest. "So he already buried me," he murmured, "and the only thing he left standing was my bank account." And Megan could hear, beneath the strained attempt at humor, the realization that his son hadn't just expected his death, he had tried to prewrite it. She told him he needed to speak to Dr. Grant immediately, to make sure his medical record reflected how clear-headed he really was, and she urged him, with the bluntness of someone who had seen too many ugly cases, to lock down his assets before Logan found a more convincing way to reach the courthouse. After they hung up, Frank called the clinic, and when Dr. Grant joined him on the line and heard what Megan had uncovered, the disbelief in her first questions hardened quickly into anger as He told him this was no longer just hurtful talk, it was calculated financial coercion. She insisted he move his accounts, update titles, and consider a trust that could not be casually rewritten, reminding him that people willing to forge one document rarely stopped after their first failed attempt. Frank listened, fingers pressed against his temple, and felt something in him settle from shock into a cold, deliberate resolve. He would follow her advice. He would protect what he had earned, but he would not confront Logan, not yet. Silence, he realized, was the only real leverage he had left. As long as his son believed the old narrative, that his father was failing and clueless, Logan would keep making mistakes, and with Megan watching the records and Dr. Grant guarding the chart, every mistake could be turned into evidence. Quietly, he began to imagine his response not as a conversation, but as a legal counterattack waiting in the dark. The next time Frank sat in Dr. Grant's exam room, the air felt lighter. He noticed it the moment she walked in, no heavy folder pressed to her chest, no tightness around her eyes. She offered him a small, honest smile as she closed the door and rolled her stool closer. "I've gone over everything twice," she said, tapping the tablet. "Good news this time." He didn't realize how hard he was gripping the edge of the table until she added, "Your condition is improving, Frank." The word improving hung there, unfamiliar, almost suspicious, like it was meant for someone else. She explained the numbers, the scans, the blood pressure readings trending slowly downward. The medication was working, his heart was responding, and the treatment plan was buying him more than time. It was buying him options. "You're not out running marathons," she said, "but you are not on a downhill slide to the end." He listened, nodding, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anger twist together in his chest. Relief because he wasn't standing at the edge of a cliff. Anger because his son had already counted that fall as a done deal. When he stepped outside afterward, the crisp air hit his lungs with a clarity that matched the charts. Before he even reached his truck, his phone buzzed. Logan's name lit the screen like a warning. Frank stared at it, then answered. "Hey, Dad," Logan said, voice wrapped in forced cheer. "So, doctor today, right? How'd it go?" The question sounded caring. The rush underneath it sounded like someone checking a stock price. "It went," Frank replied, unlocking the door with his free hand. "That's not very specific," Logan said, trying to laugh. "Everything okay? They say anything serious. Frank slid into the driver's seat, taking his time. They said the treatment's helping, he answered. I'm stable, maybe even better than before. On the other end, there was a pause only a father who knew his son well would hear. Wow, Logan said finally. That's great, really great, so they don't think it's progressing. Not the way you're hoping, Frank almost said, but he swallowed it. They think I've got some good time ahead, he said instead, with the right care. Yeah, of course, Logan replied quickly. I mean, that's what we want. We just want you comfortable. Behind the word comfortable, Frank heard stalled, delayed, inconvenient. I'll keep you updated, he said, already tired of the performance. Yeah, do that, Logan answered. And maybe we should talk soon about future plans, just so nothing's left hanging. That night, Tara called under the pretense of checking in. Her tone was syrupy, layered with that airy brightness she used when she wanted to control the conversation. I've been reading about hospice, she said, like she was recommending a vacation package. They can get involved early now, Frank. It's not just for the very end anymore. He stared at the kitchen wall, knuckles whitening around the phone. Hospice, he repeated slowly. My doctor just told me I'm improving. Well, sure, Tara said smoothly, but these things can turn fast, Better to be prepared. Inside, something hot flared, sharp enough to make his breath catch. Prepared, he thought, or positioned. He forced his voice to stay even. My doctor and I will discuss what I need, he said. A beat of silence told him she didn't like that answer. Then her smiley tone snapped back on. Of course, just trying to help. We love you. He hung up soon after, the word love ringing hollow in his ears. The next afternoon, Frank sat at Megan's kitchen table while she opened her laptop. Steam curled from the mugs of coffee between them, but neither of them reached for them much. All right, she said, her tone shifting into professional mode. We're not just reacting now, we're planning. She explained the structure of a protective trust, how assets could be moved, how instructions could be locked down, how contests could be made nearly impossible. As she spoke, she turned her screen slightly so he could see the document taking shape. His name, his terms, his decisions. At the end, she added a section referencing his current state of mind, backed by Dr. Grant's medical notes confirming full mental capacity. I'm not declaring war, Frank said quietly. Megan shook her head. No, you're putting armor on, she replied. Big difference. He signed the initial drafts with steady hands, each stroke of the pen feeling like a small railing bolted into place. Keep every text, every voicemail, she told him. If they push, if they hint, if they guilt you, we document it. So he started saving things he once would have deleted without a thought. Logan's just checking if you're okay messages, Tara's suggestions that he shouldn't be alone so much at your age. All of it went into a neat digital folder. Days later, Logan stopped by again, alone this time. He stood in the doorway, gaze skimming over Frank with a strange calculation. You look tired, Logan said. You feeling weaker lately? Any dizzy spells, confusion, that kind of thing? Frank heard the words not as concern, but as scouting. Some days are better than others, he answered mildly, not giving him anything solid. Logan nodded slowly, as if filing the answer away for later use. Frank offered a small, almost apologetic smile, letting his shoulders sag just enough to look fragile, while his mind stayed razor-sharp behind his eyes. Logan started small, the way people do when they think they're being subtle but really aren't. It began with a text early on a Tuesday, pretending to be casual. How's everything going, Dad? Need anything? Groceries, rides to the bank, whatever. Frank stared at the screen, hearing the word bank ring louder than the rest. He answered with a simple thanks, I'm all right, and left it there. 2 days later, Logan showed up in person. No Tara this time, just him in a too-expensive jacket and restless eyes that kept drifting toward the hallway where Frank's small home office sat. "Place looks good," Logan said, glancing around like he was appraising it. Still using that old bank down on Maple." Frank leaned against the doorway frame, wiping his hands on a dish towel he didn't really need. "I've been with them forever," he said. "Why?" Logan shrugged, too casual. "Just wondering, with scams and all that. Online stuff. Wouldn't want somebody draining your account while you're distracted." Frank let a beat of silence stretch until Logan shifted. "My money's fine," he said. "Doctors say I can still remember where I put it." But Logan was nothing if not persistent when he smelled an opportunity. A few nights later, in the soft blue glow of their living room, Tara sat cross-legged on their couch with a laptop open, scrolling through listings and banking ads. "This is taking too long," she said, not bothering to soften her tone. "If your dad stabilizes, he's going to start moving things around. People talk to lawyers when they get scared. Then what?" Logan rubbed a hand over his face. "He already said he's thinking about changes," he muttered. "Maybe I should just bring up accounts directly, see where things are." Tara snapped the laptop shut, eyes sharp. "You need to speed this up, Logan. If he lasts another year or two, we are sunk. The credit cards, the car, the refinancing, none of that waits for your dad to be generous." He stared at her, stung, but he didn't argue. She was only saying out loud what he'd been thinking in quieter words. The following week, Frank sat again at Megan's kitchen table, the same spot where she'd shown him the rejected will. A fresh stack of papers lay between them, crisp and orderly in a way his emotions weren't. "He started asking about banks," Frank said. "Not straight but circling." Megan didn't look surprised, she just clicked her pen and made a note. "Then we get ahead of him," she replied. "Close any accounts you don't actively use, consolidate where it makes sense, and move everything important into the trust. If he's watching numbers, let him watch the wrong ones." Frank nodded slowly, the plan feeling both aggressive and strangely fair. "I'm not hiding," he said. "I'm just not handing him the keys." Over the next few days, he drove to branches he'd been visiting for decades. The tellers greeted him by name, asked about his health, slid forms across polished counters. He smiled, answered politely, and quietly closed out savings accounts that had sat untouched for years. With Megan's guidance, he transferred balances into the new protected trust, each signature witnessed, dated, and logged. If anyone tried to argue later, there would be a trail. At night, he sat at his kitchen table, writing down brief notes about every interaction with Logan and Tara. Date, time, what they said, what they asked. It felt clinical, almost unkind, but he kept going. They had turned him into a figure on paper first. He was simply answering in kind. The first real jolt came one evening when Logan logged into his banking app and froze. One account he'd mentally already spent was nearly empty. Another was gone, closed out entirely. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, refreshing like the numbers might change. Tara, coming out of the bathroom, saw his face in the screen's glow and stopped. "What now?" she demanded. "He's moving money," Logan said. "If he changes everything, we're finished." The next day he tried to probe Frank about it, asking whether online banking had been confusing lately, and Frank just squinted, played confused, and let him leave satisfied, more certain than ever that the old man had no idea what he was really doing. The suggestion came on a Sunday afternoon, wrapped in fake tenderness. Frank had just finished washing his coffee cup when he heard Logan's car door slam outside, followed by Tara's quicker footsteps coming up the walk. By the time he dried his hands on the dish towel, they were in the doorway, wearing expressions that didn't match their eyes. "Hey, Dad," Logan said, voice soft in that rehearsed way Frank had started to recognize. He slipped off his jacket, draping it carefully over a chair he never used, like he was settling in for a serious conversation. Tara hovered just behind him, clutching a sleek folder to her chest, the edges of glossy paper poking out like the wings of something predatory. "We've been talking," Logan began, that phrase that always meant trouble, "about what's best for you long term." He sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped loosely like some low-budget therapist. "You've been through a lot lately. Why, with the tests and the tiredness and everything. We just think maybe it's time to start looking at more supportive options." Tara stepped forward on cue, sliding the folder open and producing a neat fan of brochures. "We did some research," she said brightly. "There are amazing assisted living communities now. Safe, monitored, people your age, activities, medical staff on site. You wouldn't have to worry about falling alone or forgetting medications." Her tone wrapped each concern in sugar, but every sentence translated the same way in Frank's head. Easier access, fewer witnesses. He took one of the brochures, more to buy time than anything else. Smiling retirees stared back at him from staged photos, holding hands in manicured courtyards, a nurse in perfect makeup laughing by a shuffleboard court. The text was worse. "Peace of mind for families. Ensure your loved one's affairs are handled with dignity. Transition planning made simple." It sounded less like care and more like a soft landing for someone else's conscience. "My doctor doesn't think I'm at that point," Frank said, keeping his voice even. He set the brochure on the coffee table like it might stain. "Dr. Grant says I'm improving. We're adjusting meds. She wants me staying active, not packing myself into a facility to wait for the clock to run out." His words should have reassured them. Instead, he watched frustration flicker across Logan's face like a shadow from passing headlights. "Doctors always say that," Logan snapped before catching himself. He forced a laugh. "I mean, they're optimistic, that's their job, but we have to be realistic, Dad. If something happens and you're alone here, whose fault is that going to be?" The edge in his voice gave him away. This wasn't fear for Frank's safety. This was fear of delay, of complications, of losing the narrative he thought he was writing. Tara moved closer, laying a gentle hand on Frank's arm like she was playing the role of concerned daughter-in-law. "We're just worried," she murmured. "These places can also help with finances and paperwork, power of attorney, estate coordination, all those confusing things. They'll make sure everything is handled smoothly. Isn't that what you want? To know things are in order?" Her eyes never quite matched her words. They were tracking the outcome, not the man. Before Frank could answer, there was a soft click from the hallway. Megan, who had come over earlier to drop off some documents and stayed when she saw Logan's car, stood just out of sight with her phone angled slightly toward the living room. She wasn't filming for drama. She was documenting, the way she did at work when clients said one thing in private and another in court. Each manipulative phrase became another quiet piece of evidence. Frank exhaled slowly and set the brochure on the table, his fingers resting on it like he might agree. "I appreciate you worrying," he said, "but Dr. Grant wants me at home with my own routine." A tight muscle jumped in Logan's jaw. "Fine," he said. "Then at least tell us about life insurance, any policies we should know about before something happens." The question settled between them like a stone, and though Frank felt his heart hit it hard, he only blinked slowly, letting his face blur into mild confusion as he silently braced for whatever came next. Megan didn't stumble onto it this time. She went hunting for it. Ever since she'd watched Logan lean forward in Frank's living room and ask, with that syrupy voice, if there were any life insurance policies we should know about, something in her had gone cold. That wasn't a worried son talking. That was someone checking what would pay out when the clock finally stopped. So that night, when the street outside had gone dark and quiet, she opened her laptop and started digging. She used the same tools the firm used for due diligence, public data lookups, insurance traces, financial reporting aggregators. Frank's name pulled up old auto policies, a lapsed union benefit, a tiny policy from his firefighting days that had ended years ago. She refined the search with his full social, cross-checked addresses, and then a new entry appeared. A current life insurance policy. Active. Insured Franklin J. Mercer. Policy owner, not Frank. Policy owner, Logan Mercer. Megan's jaw tightened as she clicked it open. The screen filled with clean, indifferent lines of text. It read like any other contract to someone who didn't know the story. To her, every line was a flare. Frank listed as the insured. Beneficiaries: Logan Mercer and Tara Mercer, 50% each. No backup beneficiaries, no mention that Frank had ever been consulted, no note that this was part of some agreed-upon family plan. Just a quiet arrangement placed on top of his life, like plastic over furniture. She scrolled to the conditions and felt her stomach turn. The policy highlighted enhanced benefit if the insured died prematurely, prior to actuarial expectancy. Why, with a boosted payout during an initial window? Megan had seen enough sales brochures to know how this was pitched. Sudden accidents, unforeseen illness, protect your loved ones. But tied to everything else she knew, the forged will, the pressure for assisted living, the way they talked about Frank as if he were already halfway in the ground, it didn't look like protection. It looked like a timer. The next afternoon she sat at Frank's kitchen table, the printed summary in a plain folder between them. He looked tired, but not physically. It was the kind of exhaustion that lived behind the eyes. "What now?" he asked quietly. Megan opened the folder and turned it toward him. "Logan opened a life insurance policy on you," she said. "You're the insured. He and Tara are the only beneficiaries." Frank stared down at his own name, at the numbers lined up beside it. For a long moment he didn't say anything. His thumb ran absently along the edge of the page, stopping on the clause about premature death. "So if I go sooner," he said slowly, "they get more." Megan nodded once. "That's what the math says." He leaned back, the chair creaking under the shift of his weight. "First the will I never signed," he murmured. "Now this. They're not just waiting for me to die, Megan. They're planning the payday." Later that week, he brought the folder to Dr. Grant. She read it at her desk, glasses slid low on her nose, lips pressed into a thin line. When she finished, she set the papers down very carefully, like she was afraid of what she might do if she moved too fast. "Did you agree to this?" she asked. "No," Frank said. "Didn't even know it existed until Megan dug it up." Dr. Grant inhaled sharply, then exhaled through her nose. "On its own, this is legal," she said. "People buy policies on parents all the time, but given everything else, I don't like where this is going." She turned to her computer. "We're locking your medical record down tight. Every improvement, every clear test, every time you understand and repeat your treatment plan. I'm documenting it. If anyone tries to suggest you're confused or near the end, I want a stack of facts saying they're lying." Frank watched her type, the clicking keys strangely comforting. Her notes weren't dramatic. Alert and oriented, understands risks and benefits, participates in care decisions. Clinical language, but each sentence felt like a support beam being installed under his feet. That evening Megan had her laptop open again, but this time she wasn't just searching, she was building. "I'm not calling it a case yet," she said, "but I'm building a record. Timeline of the forged will attempt. Timeline of the policy. Their visits. The crap they say about your health. If this ever hits a courtroom, patterns matter more than speeches." Frank listened, fingers wrapped around his coffee mug, feeling the old firefighter part of him recognize the rhythm. Before a fire, you checked your gear, mapped your exits, and assumed the worst wasn't just possible, it was likely. "So I hit back now?" he asked. Megan shook her head. "No, not yet. You don't tip them off. You let them think they're ahead. People who believe the story in their own heads make the biggest mistakes." Frank sat very still, the idea sinking in. Logan believed he was dying. Logan had already spent money in his mind, already gambled on a policy that paid more if his father didn't stick around. Fine. Let him. "If he wants to stack paper against me," Frank said quietly, more to himself than to her, "then I'll let him keep stacking. And when it falls—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. He just closed the folder over the policy, knowing that for the first time, the trap wasn't only under his feet. Logan's text came on a Thursday afternoon, so upbeat it almost read like a sales pitch. He added emojis he never used with his father, little clapping hands and smiley faces, inviting Frank over for a big family dinner. Frank stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back a simple sure. He drove over at dusk, the sky bruised purple over the cul-de-sac, and the glow of their front windows made the house look warmer than it had any right to. Logan opened the door before Frank could knock, grin stretched a little too wide. "There he is," he said, clapping a hand on Frank's shoulder. "House hasn't been this lucky in months." The forced excitement felt like static in the air. Inside, the table was already set, candles lit, plates arranged like a magazine spread. Tara moved between stove and table, serving food with dramatic care, eyes flicking to Frank every few seconds, as if checking his reactions more than whether he needed anything to eat. She'd made pot roast, his favorite, the kind she used to ask him how to cook, but tonight it tasted like a distraction. Tara hovered near his elbow, refilling his glass before he was halfway down, smiling a split second too late at every joke. Logan kept the conversation lit. Tea, old firehouse stories, neighborhood gossip, little updates about work, until the plates were mostly empty and Frank's guard, he probably hoped, was lower. Then Logan cleared his throat, glanced at Tara, and reached for a neat stack of papers sitting at the end of the table, just far enough away to pretend they'd been an afterthought. "Dad," he began, smoothing the top page with his palm, "I've been thinking a lot about everything you've been going through. I talked to a guy at work and he said it's smart to have some medical decisions documents in place. Nothing crazy," he added quickly. "Just stuff so we can help if you're ever too out of it to decide." Tara slid a pen toward Frank, eyes bright. "It's just routine," she said. "Power of attorney, advance directive, that kind of thing. So doctors listen to us when you're not feeling your best." Frank picked up the pen, then set it back down, squinting at the small print. "You know these eyes aren't what they used to be," he said, putting a slight tremor in his voice. "Low light, tiny letters. I'll need to look this over at home, maybe with my magnifier." Tara let the smile slip for half a second, annoyance tightening her mouth before she forced it back into place. "It's really straightforward," she insisted. "Logan can walk you through it now. It'll take 5 minutes." Logan leaned in, tapping one signature line with his finger. "You trust me, right?" he said. "We'd never do anything that isn't in your best interest." The words were smooth, but his eyes were tight, anxious, tracking every twitch in Frank's face. Frank pushed the papers back an inch. "I trust you enough not to rush me," he said. "Dr. Grant's always telling me not to make big decisions when I'm tired, and I'm about done for the day." He stood a little slower than he needed to, letting a hand rest on the table as if steadying himself. "Thank you for dinner," he added, "but I'm going to head out early." Tara opened her mouth to protest, then shut it with an audible click, frustration flashing before she looked down and began stacking plates too forcefully. Logan walked him to the door, jaw tight. "We're just trying to help," he said. "If something happens before this is signed, it'll be a mess." Frank stepped onto the porch, the cool air clearing his head. "Nothing's happening tonight," he replied. "Good night, Logan." On the drive home, streetlights slid across his windshield like slow warnings. The stack of papers on the table, Tara's impatient eyes, Logan's too-tight smile, everything pressed on his chest heavier than any diagnosis. As soon as he was back in his own kitchen, he called Megan, describing the dinner, the documents, the pressure to sign under candlelight. Megan and Dr. Grant demanded full legal protection. It came with the afternoon mail, mixed in with a hardware store flyer and a charity appeal, plain white with a small printed return address from the county courthouse. Frank turned it over in his hands once, twice, feeling the weight of it before he even slid a finger under the seal. People didn't get mail from the court for nothing. He unfolded the notice at his kitchen table, eyes tracking the heavy legal language until the words snapped into focus. Petition to appoint guardian and conservator. Alleged incapacitated person, Franklin J. Mercer. For a moment his vision tunneled. He saw his name there not as a person but as a label, alleged incapacitated. He read on, petitioner, Logan Mercer, supporting statements attached. He exhaled slowly, pressing his thumb against the page to keep his hand from shaking. This was it, the move they'd been edging toward with every leading question and forced dinner. In the attached packet, Tara's name appeared again and again. Her statement was 3 pages long, thick with phrases designed to sound sad, not vicious. Frank skimmed it, jaw tightening. She described him as often confused, claimed he forgot where he was during conversations, suggested he'd misplaced important bank documents, and repeated the same stories without remembering Dee just told them. Every ordinary moment of aging had been twisted, exaggerated, turned into evidence that he couldn't manage his life. Logan's own statement was shorter but sharper. He wrote about declining health, increasing frailty, and worsening mental lapses, mentioning times Frank had asked him to repeat something or leaned on the handrail coming down the porch steps. He painted his father as a man drifting away, unable to keep up with his bills or understand his treatment. At the end, in neat block letters, he requested authority to manage Frank's finances and make medical decisions for his safety. Frank read it all twice, then set the papers down. His chest hurt, but not in the way that sent him reaching for medication. It was a tightness born of clarity. They hadn't just planned his death. They were trying to take his life away before it even ended. He picked up the notice again, scanned to the bottom, and saw the line that mattered: hearing to be set upon service and response. He called Dr. Grant first. She came on the line between patients, and he could hear the rustle of her white coat as she moved into a quieter corner. When he told her what Logan had filed, her silence was different this time, colder, controlled. "He's claiming you're incompetent," she finally said. "Frank, you drove yourself to your last appointment. You asked detailed questions about your labs. You're more engaged than half my 50-year-old patients." "That's not how he wrote it," Frank replied. "Then we correct the record," she said. "Come in tomorrow. I'll do a full cognitive assessment, orientation, memory, judgment, the works. I'll write a report that leaves no room for interpretation." True to her word, she sat with him the next day in a small consultation room, not rushing, not talking down to him. She asked him to recall 3 words after a delay, to interpret simple scenarios, to explain his treatment plan in his own words. When they were done, she typed steadily for 20 minutes, documenting every result, every observation, her language precise. No evidence of dementia, fully capable of understanding financial and medical decisions, independently managing daily living. Megan came over that evening with her laptop and a legal pad, hair pulled back, expression all business. Frank slid the petition across the table. She read it quickly, eyes growing sharper with each page. "Okay," she said, "here's how we play this. They filed first, but that doesn't mean they get to tell the only story." She opened a fresh document and began building a timeline. Date of the forged will attempt. Date the insurance policy was opened. Dates and times of the texts and calls asking about his decline. She pulled up saved messages where Logan mentioned money pressures, where Tara hinted about waiting for things to settle. Each one went into the file, a quiet brick in a wall she intended to stand up in front of any judge who would listen. "They're saying you can't handle your finances," Megan said. "We're going to show you've been handling them deliberately, and that their interest lines up a little too neatly with their debts. Motive isn't everything, but judges notice patterns." Somewhere across town, in a smaller house that always felt too loud, Logan sat at his own kitchen table, feeling triumphant. He'd handed the petition to the clerk that morning, watched the stamp come down, heard the soft thump as it became official. In his mind, the rest was automatic. The court would see a sick old man, hear stories about confusion and falls, and hand him the reins for his father's good. Once that happened, the trust, the accounts, even the house could be steered the way he wanted. He didn't know about the trust's protections. He didn't know about the recordings, the documents, the doctors willing to stand up for Frank. As far as he was concerned, he was already halfway to winning. A week later, another envelope arrived in Frank's mailbox, the same courthouse return address, the same thin paper that carried heavy consequences. He opened it at his kitchen counter, Megan standing beside him, Dr. Grant's report already tucked safely in a folder nearby. The notice was brief this time, all dates and times and room numbers. Court hearing scheduled, probate division, petition regarding capacity of Franklin J. Mercer. Frank read the line twice, then looked up, meeting Megan's eyes. The clock he'd been feeling for weeks wasn't just about his health anymore. It was counting down to a room where his son thought he'd walk in alone. In the days before the hearing, Frank made a quiet decision. If his son was going to drag his life into a courtroom, he wasn't going to meet that moment hollow and afraid. He started with the small lake on the edge of town, the one where he and Logan used to skip stones when his boy still believed his dad could fix anything. The pier boards creaked under his boots as he walked to the end and watched the gray water ripple. Ducks cut slow paths across the surface, unconcerned with subpoenas or petitions. He breathed in damp air and let his shoulders loosen. Another afternoon he drove to the old firehouse, now half turned into a community center, the red bay doors still there like relics. One of the younger firefighters recognized him, shook his hand, called him Cap out of habit. They traded a few stories, the kind that always ended with somebody walking out of a bad situation alive. Walking back to his truck, Frank felt the memory of purpose settle his heartbeat. He even stopped at the diner that still kept his favorite pie on the menu, more out of habit than appetite. The waitress, who'd known him since his hair was more brown than gray, topped off his coffee without asking and asked how he was holding up. "I've seen worse weeks," he said, and it was oddly true. The bruise of betrayal was deep, but it hadn't killed him. It had, in some dark way, clarified him. While Frank moved through the places that had built his life, Logan kept trying to wedge himself deeper into it through a screen. The texts came almost every day now. "How's your energy been? Any dizziness? Have the doctors said the illness is progressing?" The phrasing was always clinical, as if he was just worried about side effects, but the rhythm felt like someone checking whether a door was unlocked yet. Frank answered each message with the same careful politeness he used with pushy salesmen and nosy neighbors. "Doing all right, taking it day by day. Doctor says we're monitoring things." He never mentioned the improving numbers, the stronger lungs, the steadier blood pressure. Those belonged to his side of the line now, not Logan's. The less his son knew, the more clearly his choices would reveal themselves. Megan, meanwhile, spent her evenings turning over stones in the digital world. Between public records and a few paid databases the firm subscribed to, she pieced together a picture Logan would never have willingly shown his father. Maxed-out credit cards, a line of credit secured against their house, a recent denial on an application for a new loan, income listed optimistically, expenses trimmed down to the bone. On paper, the Mercers were bleeding cash. One afternoon, leaving the grocery store, Megan spotted Tara in the parking lot near the far carts, phone pressed to her ear, voice sharp enough to cut glass. She wasn't performing this time, she thought no one was listening. "I told you we'd have the money soon," Tara hissed. "We're waiting on family funds. No, we can't make a lump payment right now. I said we're handling it." She ended the call with a hard jab of her thumb and stood there, breathing fast. Later, she relayed the scene to Frank at his kitchen table, her expression a mix of anger and grim confirmation. As he listened, something clicked into place. The exaggerated concern, the rush to control his paperwork, the sudden interest in hospice and clarity and signatures. It all lined up neatly against the simple fact that his son and daughter-in-law were running out of runway. Their desperation didn't make their actions less cruel, but it did make them predictable, and predictability was something he could use. At night he pulled the court notice from its folder and read it again, not to torture himself but to memorize the battlefield. Date, time, division, judge. He said nothing to Logan, nothing to Tara. Instead, he laid out his clothes for that day like a uniform, stacked Dr. Grant's report and Megan's files, and waited, calm on the surface while the tide inside him rose. The courthouse hallway smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Frank sat on the wooden bench outside Probate Division 3, hands folded over the folder in his lap. Inside it were Dr. Grant's report, Megan's timeline, copies of texts and policies. Across the hall, Logan paced in a suit that didn't quite fit, phone in his hand, jaw working. Tara sat beside him, legs crossed tight, whispering hard into his shoulder. Every so often, one of them glanced over at Frank, then away quickly, like he was a problem they'd already solved. Mercer Matter, a clerk called from the doorway. Capacity hearing, Judge Reed presiding. They filed in. The courtroom was smaller than Frank expected, more conference room than movie set. Judge Wallace Reed sat at the bench, glasses low, expression unreadable. He watched as Frank took his seat at one table with Megan beside him, legal pad ready, and Logan and Tara settled at the other with their attorney, a slick man who kept adjusting his tie. "Mr. Mercer," the judge began, looking at Logan first, "you filed a petition claiming your father is mentally incompetent and in need of a guardian. You understand the seriousness of that claim?" "Yes, Your Honor," Logan said. His voice trembled just enough to sound like concern. "I'm just trying to protect him." "Then let's hear your evidence," Judge Reed replied. Logan's attorney led him through the story they'd rehearsed. Logan talked about decline and forgetfulness, about repeated questions and supposed confusion over bills. He described Frank as frail, disoriented, unable to keep track of his treatments. "We're afraid he'll be taken advantage of," Logan said, casting a quick glance at Frank, "or make decisions that leave him broke and unsafe." Judge Reed watched him closely, chin propped on one hand. "And you're asking for control over his medical and financial decisions," he clarified, "as his guardian and conservator." "Yes, sir, for his own good." Tara was called next. She straightened in the witness chair, smoothing her skirt, eyes glistening on cue. She repeated the same phrases from her written statement, but bigger this time. Frank wandering, Frank forgetting who he's talking to, Frank leaving the stove on, a thing that had never happened. She painted the picture of a man slipping away. "Mrs. Mercer," the judge interrupted at one point, "when, specifically, did you witness him forget where he was?" She blinked. "Well, it's more of a general pattern, Your Honor. He's scattered." "That's not an answer," he said mildly. "Try again." She fumbled, grasping at vague afternoons and that one time at the grocery store. Dates shifted, details blurred. The more the attorney tried to steer her back on track, the more tangled she became. A small line appeared between Judge Reed's brows. When it was Frank's side's turn, Megan rose. "Your Honor," she said, "with the court's permission, we'd like to call Dr. Evelyn Grant." Dr. Grant walked to the stand in her dark blazer, ID clipped to her pocket. She was sworn in, then rested her hands calmly in her lap. "Dr. Grant," Megan began, "how long have you been treating Mr. Mercer?" "About a year," she replied. "I'm his primary physician." "Have you evaluated his mental status during that time?" "Many times," Dr. Grant said, "formally and informally." "And your findings?" She met the judge's eyes directly. "Frank Mercer is not mentally incompetent. He is fully oriented, understands his medical conditions, and participates appropriately in his care. His recent tests show improvement, not decline. He is not dying, nor is he near the end of life based on any medical evidence I have." Logan's head snapped toward her. "That's not what he told us," he blurted, before his lawyer tugged his sleeve. Judge Reed's gaze shifted back to him briefly, then returned to Dr. Grant. "Can you elaborate on his so-called confusion described in the petition?" Dr. Grant nodded. "Occasional forgetfulness is normal at his age, but I've seen nothing approaching dementia or inability to manage his affairs. In fact, he's been very clear and deliberate about wanting to understand his options." And Megan added carefully, "Were you aware that his son has been representing him to others as terminal?" "Yes," Dr. Grant said, a controlled anger warming her tone. "Those representations are false." A murmur rippled through the room. Megan let it settle, then picked up a different folder. Your Honor, we also have evidence that while Mr. Mercer was being described as incompetent and near death, his son attempted to file a forged will in his name. Logan went rigid. His lawyer started to object, but Judge Reed held up a hand. "I'll hear it," he said. Megan walked the judge through the timeline. The rejected will, Logan listed as sole heir. Tara's notarization claiming Frank was too weak to sign. Then she laid down the next piece. The life insurance policy Logan opened on his father, with enhanced benefit for premature death, listing only himself and Tara as beneficiaries. The courtroom temperature seemed to drop. "So while telling this court his father can't manage his money," Megan said evenly, "Mr. Logan Mercer has been positioning himself to receive all of it, and more if his father dies sooner rather than later." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. All eyes swung back to Logan and Tara. Tara's poise cracked, her hands shook in her lap. "We were just planning ahead," she said suddenly, voice higher than before. "Everyone told us." "Mrs. Mercer," Judge Reed cut in, "no one told you to forge a signature or to exaggerate a man's health to a court." "I didn't forge anything," Tara snapped, panic edging out polish. "Logan said it was what his dad wanted, I just notarized what he—" "Tara," Logan hissed, but it was too late. The shift in the room was almost physical. The clerk's eyes narrowed. Someone exhaled sharply in the back row. Logan's attorney leaned in, whispering gently, but Logan sat stiff, color draining from his face. Judge Reed leaned back in his chair, looking from Frank to his son and back again. When he spoke, his voice was flat, all traces of earlier patience gone. "Mr. Mercer," he said to Logan, "I see enough here to be seriously concerned about your motives. You've painted your father as a dying, confused man when his doctor says otherwise. You've attempted to profit uniquely from his estate. There are red flags of coercion and potential fraud all over this file." He turned to the clerk. "I'm not ruling on the petition today," he said. "Instead, I'm ordering a formal investigation into possible financial exploitation and fraud related to Mr. Franklin Mercer. We'll be referring this matter to the appropriate authorities." Logan swallowed hard, eyes darting, as the quiet buzz of the courtroom swelled around him. And for the first time since this started, it wasn't sympathy he felt pressing in. It was suspicion, and something much closer to judgment, closing in step by step. "Your Honor, I didn't forge anything," he blurted, words tumbling over each other. "If there's a problem with that will, it's because Tara handled it. She dealt with the notary stuff. I just signed where they told me to sign." His chair scraped as he half turned toward her. "You told me it was fine," he added, voice rising. "You said it would look more official if you notarized it." Tara's head snapped around like he'd slapped her. "Are you kidding me right now?" she shot back, loud enough that people in the back row straightened. "You brought me that document. You said your dad wanted it done but was too tired to deal with lawyers. You told me to stamp it. Don't you dare dump this on me because the judge doesn't believe you." Her composure was gone. The polished, patient daughter-in-law had vanished. Judge Reed's eyes narrowed. "Both of you will remember you're under oath," he said. "Finger-pointing doesn't change facts." But they were already in it, spinning harder. Logan jabbed a finger toward Tara. "She's the one who kept pushing," he insisted. "Hospice, assisted living, making sure the paperwork was done before anything happened. She kept saying if we didn't get control now, my dad would waste everything on doctors and trusts, and whatever that neighbor was putting in his head." The word neighbor came out like a sneer. Tara laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Oh, right, because you weren't the one checking his balances every week, Logan. You're the one who opened that policy on him. You're the one who said, and I quote, 'If he goes fast, at least it fixes our debt.'" The room went very still. Tara realized, too late, how that sounded in front of a judge already suspicious. Their lawyer put his hands up, whispering urgently, but the damage was done. In their scramble to shove blame onto each other, dates shifted, motives changed. Logan swore the will came before he knew about Frank's improving health. Tara insisted they both knew he wasn't actually terminal. One claimed the policy was standard planning. The other admitted they needed a financial reset. Every attempt to patch one hole tore open another. Megan rose smoothly, a contrast to the chaos across the aisle. "Your Honor," she said, "with the court's permission, I have recordings that may help clarify what Mr. and Mrs. Mercer's priorities have been." She didn't look at Logan as she spoke. She looked at the judge. Judge Reed gestured for the bailiff to take the small USB drive she offered. Moments later, Logan's own voice filled the room through the speakers, casual and unguarded. On one clip, he laughed to a friend on speakerphone. "He's dying anyway. The money's basically ours, man. We just have to be patient." In another, Tara said, "We're counting on that inheritance. Once it hits, the cards, the car, all of it is gone." You could feel the air change. In the third recording, captured in Frank's living room, Logan's tone was lower, more calculating. "If we get power of attorney and conservatorship, it's game over," he said. "Dad won't fight it, he's too tired. We'll move the accounts, set things up the right way. By the time he realizes, it's done." His words echoed off the wood paneling of the courtroom, stripped of charm, stripped of context, bare. Judge Reed removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose for a long moment. When he put them back on, his gaze was hard. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "do you understand that intentionally misrepresenting your father's condition to gain control of his assets could expose you to criminal charges? Fraud, financial exploitation, potential insurance issues, depending on what you plan to do with that policy." Color drained from Logan's face. I wasn't trying to exploit him," he stammered. "It was a joke. Those recordings, we were just venting. You know how families talk." "Families who care don't talk about someone like they're a payout," the judge replied quietly. "And they certainly don't come into my courtroom calling that same person confused and dying when his doctor says otherwise." Through all of it, Frank sat still. He didn't flinch at the recordings. He'd already lived those words once, hidden behind a garage door in a lifetime of loyalty. He watched Logan's foot bounce under the table, watched Tara's arms cross defensively, watched their carefully built story collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. He didn't speak, didn't sigh, didn't move to comfort or correct. For the first time, he let his son see what it looked like when his father stopped stepping in to soften the blow. Tara's control finally snapped. "This is ridiculous," she burst out, pushing back her chair. "We're being treated like criminals for trying to handle a situation nobody else in this family would deal with." She threw Frank a look that mixed resentment and something like fear. "You know what? I'm done." She grabbed her purse, ignored the judge's sharp, "Mrs. Mercer, you are not excused," and stormed up the aisle anyway, heels striking the floor too loud. The door swung shut behind her with a hollow bang. All eyes shifted back to Logan, now alone at the petitioner's table, his wife gone, his lawyer whispering frantically, the judge's warning hanging in the air like smoke. For the first time since this started, the confidence drained from his posture. His shoulders curled in, his gaze skittered away from his father's. He looked less like a man, protecting his parent, and more like someone who'd finally realized the ground he'd been standing on wasn't solid at all, and the court wasn't done looking at how far he'd tried to make his father fall. The courthouse had emptied out, leaving only the echo of shuffling papers and the faint hum of ventilation in the hallways. Frank walked toward the exit with Megan at his side, the weight of the hearing still sitting somewhere behind his ribs, not heavy, not painful, just present. Before they reached the doors, he heard hurried footsteps behind him. "Logan." "Dad, wait." Frank stopped, but he didn't turn around. Something in the tone told him exactly what was coming. When he finally faced his son, Logan looked smaller than he had inside the courtroom, sleeves pushed up unevenly, eyes wide with panic, wearing a thin mask of remorse. "I need to explain," Logan said quickly. "That whole thing, it got blown out of proportion. You misunderstood what I was trying to do." Frank let the words settle between them. They sounded rehearsed, pulled from the same drawer where Logan kept excuses and half-truths. "I misunderstood," Frank repeated, voice steady. "Which part? The will you forged, the policy you hid, or the petition saying I don't know my own name?" Logan winced. "Dad, come on. Tara twisted things. The insurance was her idea. And the will, look, I thought that's what you wanted. You were sick, you were confused, you said you wanted me to handle things. I was trying to help. I swear." There it was, not accountability, not apology, just a desperate reshuffling of blame. Frank studied him carefully. For years he'd excused behavior as immaturity, stress, bad influences. But standing here in this hallway that smelled like truth and consequences, he saw something more permanent, something lodged so deep inside his son it had become instinct. Greed wasn't just his weakness, it was his compass. "You weren't helping me," Frank said quietly. "You were helping yourself." Logan's jaw tightened. "So that's it, you're just going to believe them. Megan, the doctor. You're throwing your own son away because a judge got the wrong impression." "No," Frank said, and for the first time he felt the truth as he spoke it. "I'm choosing dignity, something you haven't offered me in a long time." Logan's face went flat, then hardened. "You're making a mistake," he snapped. "You can't let outsiders run your life. Dad, I'm your family. I was supposed to take care of everything. That was the plan." "Your plan," Frank corrected, "not mine." A tense silence followed. Logan's eyes flickered with something, fear, anger, calculation, before he took a step back, exhale sharp. "Fine," he said. "Do what you want." But his voice had shifted. This wasn't surrender. It was retreat, strategic, temporary. "Just remember who was willing to be there for you," he added, then turned away, walking fast, shoulders rigid. Megan approached slowly after he disappeared around the corner. "You handled that better than most people would have," she said. "If he'd tried that on some of our clients, the sheriff's office would have been called." Frank shook his head. "He thinks I'll bend. He's always counted on that." "Not anymore," Megan replied. "Come on, we should go over the last pieces." They spent the evening at Megan's dining table, documents spread neatly across the wood. She walked him through the updates she drafted. The trust tightened, contingencies clarified, successor trustees named, every loophole sealed. Frank initialed and signed with a steadiness that surprised even him. "These protections," Megan said, tapping the final page. "This is you making decisions, not panic, not revenge. Clarity. No one can override this without proving fraud themselves." Frank nodded. He felt lighter, not because the danger had passed, but because he'd stopped giving Logan space inside his conscience. The next morning he visited Dr. Grant for a scheduled check-in. She reviewed the case notes, the report she'd filed, and the upcoming steps the court would take. "You've done everything right," she said, closing the file. "But now you need to guard something else, your peace. Don't let him drag you back into emotional chaos. Stress will undo the progress we've made." Frank smiled faintly. "Funny thing," he said. "For the first time in months I'm not stressed, I'm clear." She reached out, squeezed his hand. "Good, keep choosing clarity." That afternoon he walked out of the clinic into sharp winter sunlight. It struck him then. He felt untethered from the fear that had been gripping him since the night he overheard Logan outside the garage. He wasn't waiting for the next betrayal. He wasn't shrinking from it. He had moved past it. And yet, some instinct told him this wasn't the end. Back at Logan's house, blinds drawn tight, Tara gone for hours, Logan stood hunched over his dining table, phone buzzing beside stacks of overdue notices he hadn't shown anyone. His face was tight, eyes darting between numbers and deadlines. The hearing had cornered him. The trust had shut him out. His father's rejection had humiliated him. Slowly he picked up his phone, scrolling to a contact he hadn't used in years, someone who specialized in solutions. Frank was freeing himself. Logan was preparing something else entirely. Logan didn't go quiet after the hearing. He just changed tactics. He showed up 2 days later on Frank's porch without texting first, shoulders hunched against the cold, expression caught somewhere between hurt and accusation. Frank opened the door only halfway, leaving the screen latched. It wasn't petty. It was a line. "We need to talk," Logan said. "No greeting, no dad, just need." Frank stepped onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind him. "Talk," he said. Logan let out a breath like he'd been rehearsing it. "So that's it. You let that paralegal and that doctor turn you against me, and now you're rewriting everything, changing your will just to punish us." Frank stared at him, genuinely taken aback by the word. "Punish you," he repeated. "You forged my signature, tried to call me incompetent in court, and took a bet out on my early death. I'm not punishing you, Logan. I'm correcting my mistake." Logan shook his head, lips flattening. "You're angry, I get it, but you're making emotional decisions. You're letting spite run your life. You always said the house would be mine one day. Your savings, your pension, you said you wanted to take care of family. What happened to that?" "I opened my eyes," Frank answered. "Yeah, and what did you see?" Logan shot back. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're cutting your own son off to make a point. You really want it on your conscience that you changed everything at the end just because we pushed too hard." Frank felt a flicker of the old guilt try to surface, the reflexive urge to back down, smooth it over, apologize for having boundaries. He let it pass. "If I change my will," he said quietly, "it's because I don't trust you. That's not spite. That's self-defense." Logan's jaw clenched. "You know I can challenge it," he said. The softness dropped out of his tone. "Any new will, any new trust, I can contest, drag it out, make it ugly for everyone you leave behind. You really want your legacy tied up in court for years." There it was, not a son pleading, a man trying to scare an old man into compliance. Frank didn't flinch. "Do what you think you need to do," he replied. "I already watched you tell a judge I'm too far gone to think. Didn't work out great for you." A muscle jumped in Logan's cheek. For a second, raw anger flashed, then he swallowed it back down and forced a smile that never reached his eyes. "You're making a mistake, Dad," he said. "But fine, have it your way." He walked off the porch without looking back, slamming his car door so hard the window rattled. That night it was Tara's turn. Frank's phone buzzed on the counter while he was rinsing dishes. The first message came in with a soft chime. "Frank, can we talk?" The second followed before he could answer. "I know things are messy, but we're in a really bad place right now. The cards, the house, everything, we're drowning." He dried his hands and picked up the phone. The messages kept coming, each more desperate than the last. "We counted on that inheritance. We made plans. That's on us, I know, but please, we just need a little help to get through this patch. Then, Logan is under so much pressure, he's not thinking straight. If you cut him off now, you'll break him." Frank read them all, thumb hovering over the keyboard. For years, that kind of plea would have ripped him open. He would have reached for his checkbook, convinced himself he was buying peace. But now, every line reminded him of how easily she joked about precious last moments when she thought he was terminal. He typed carefully, "I'm sorry you're struggling. I won't be giving you money. Take care." Within seconds, the tone shifted. "So you're just going to sit on all that while we lose everything? After everything we did for you? Another ping. You're being cruel, Frank. This isn't you. They've poisoned you against your own family." He muted the thread and set the phone face down on the table. The next day, Megan sat across from him, laptop open, expression grimly focused. "You did exactly the right thing not engaging," she said. "Don't argue, don't explain. Let their words stand on their own." She had him forward every text, every voicemail, every guilt-soaked message. She organized them chronologically, added brief context notes, date, recent events, what they'd already tried. Alongside them, she attached the petition to declare him incompetent, the rejected will, the insurance policy summary, and Dr. Grant's report. "It's not just that they're asking for money," she explained. "It's the pattern. Pressure, manipulation, threats to contest your decisions. Judge Reed needs to see this isn't a one-time misunderstanding. It's a campaign. Frank watched as she compiled everything into a clean, labeled packet. It looked clinical, emotionless, but he could feel the story it told. "Feels strange," he admitted, "putting my son on paper like this." "They did it first," Megan said quietly. "You're just answering in a language the court understands." A few days later, Judge Reed's clerk logged the thick envelope into the system. The packet was placed on the judge's desk with a note flagging it for review in the ongoing matter of In re. Franklin J. Mercer. By that point, the judge had already seen enough to be wary. This new stack of messages, pleading, manipulative, threatening, didn't help Logan's case. Frank didn't see that part. What he saw were the consequences in real time. The polite text stopped, the mask slid. Logan's messages turned sharper, shorter. "You really sent our private conversations to the court. Then you want a war over this. Fine. You have no idea what you're starting." Missed calls stacked up in the log, one after another, never leaving a voicemail, just proof of how often his son tried to batter his way back into control. Frank stopped answering altogether. From the outside, his house looked the same. Same curtains, same porch light, same car in the driveway. Inside, though, he could feel something shifting around him. Somewhere on the other side of town, Logan was running out of leverage and time, and Frank knew what men did when they felt everything slipping. Aggression was replacing charm now. And with each new unanswered ping, you could feel it speeding up. Judge Reed took his time reading through the stack of papers in front of him, turning each page with a slow, deliberate motion that made the courtroom hold its breath. Frank sat at one table beside Megan, hands folded, eyes forward. Across from them, Logan shifted in his chair, knee bouncing hard enough to rattle the wood. Tara had returned for this hearing, though she sat one seat away from him, a thin strip of upholstery between them like a quiet admission that whatever they were, it wasn't united. "All right," Judge Reed said at last, voice carrying easily in the small room. "I've reviewed the testimony, the medical records, the financial documents, and the communications provided to this court. What I see is not a confused old man in need of rescue." He looked directly at Frank. "I see a competent adult whose trust has been abused." He shifted his gaze to Logan. "And I see a son who has attempted to use his father's age and health as leverage to gain control of money that does not belong to him." A murmur moved through the gallery. Judge Reed continued, unbothered. "The petition to declare Mr. Franklin Mercer incompetent is hereby denied with prejudice. Furthermore, this court finds that Mr. Logan Mercer has engaged in financial coercion and acted with intent to defraud his father." Logan's mouth opened slightly as if he'd misheard. "Your Honor," he started. "Sit down, Mr. Mercer," the judge said, not raising his voice. "You'll have your chance to speak when I'm finished." Logan sank back into his chair. The color had drained from his face. "Given that finding," Judge Reed went on, "I am ordering that Mr. Logan Mercer be removed as beneficiary from all major estate rights associated with Mr. Franklin Mercer, including any prior will, pay-on-death designations, or transferable interests under this court's jurisdiction." Megan exhaled slowly just once. Fr. Hank stayed still. The words washed over him like cold water, shocking and clean. "As to Mrs. Tara Mercer," the judge said, turning a separate document around, "the record will reflect her participation in notarizing a document this court has reason to believe did not bear Mr. Mercer's genuine signature. Her involvement in the related life insurance arrangements is also noted. These matters are being referred to the appropriate authorities for further review." Tara's hand flew to her mouth. "I just stamped what he brought me," she whispered, but the protest went nowhere. It simply hung in the charged air. Judge Reed looked back to Frank's table. "Mr. Mercer," he said, his tone softening, "your attorney and advisors have established a valid, carefully constructed trust. In light of what we've heard, I am ordering that this trust be sealed from future contests, except on very narrow grounds of proven fraud. No one before this bench today will be allowed to challenge it." Logan made a small, strangled sound. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment he looked far younger than his years, like a boy who had just watched the prize he'd been promised vanish in front of him. Tears welled in his eyes, not from remorse, Frank suspected, but from the blunt realization that the money was gone. Through it all, Frank sat upright, hands still folded. His heart was pounding, but his face stayed calm. He answered the judge's few direct questions clearly. "Yes, Your Honor, and I understand." For the first time in a long time, he felt like someone whose word mattered more than anyone else's story about him. When Judge Reed finally adjourned the hearing, he paused with his hand on the stack of files. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "it takes courage to stand up to your own blood in a room like this. For what it's worth, the court recognizes that." A few people in the gallery nodded. Dr. Grant, seated in the second row, gave Frank a small, proud smile. Megan closed her folder with a quiet, satisfied tap. Logan didn't move. He stared at the empty space on the table where his future had just been erased, breathing in short, uneven bursts, while his father stood slowly and walked toward the doors, the path ahead. The drive home from the courthouse didn't feel like any drive I'd taken in years. The sky over the Pacific Northwest hung low and gray, but for once it didn't match the weight in my chest. That weight, months of fear, betrayal, paperwork, and sleepless nights, had finally cracked. Judge Reed's ruling echoed in my mind: fraud, coercion, removal as beneficiary, trust sealed. Words that should have tasted bitter somehow felt like clean air. I kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting easy on my thigh, surprised at how steady everything felt. My heartbeat wasn't trying to outrun itself anymore. Turning onto my street, I slowed the truck. The maple trees were shedding their last stubborn leaves, scattering gold across the wet pavement. My house came into view, same chipped shutters, same leaning mailbox, but today it didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like a place where something might heal. I pulled into the driveway and shut off the engine. For a long moment I stayed seated, letting the silence settle over me like a blanket. No legal emergencies, no calls from lawyers. No threats disguised as concern for my own son, just quiet. My phone buzzed. Old reflex made my stomach tighten, but when I checked the screen, it was Logan. It was Dr. Grant. I answered, "Afternoon, Doc." Her voice warmed. "Frank, I saw the court decision. How are you holding up?" I exhaled slowly, tired but lighter than I expected. "You did something incredibly difficult today," she said. "You protected your well-being. I'm proud of you." I stared at the house. Feels strange to be proud of something that came from stopping my own son. "That's not what you did," she said gently. "You stopped harm, that's different, and healthier. Call me sometime this week, we'll check your numbers. I'm betting they look better already." A small, reluctant smile tugged at me. Wouldn't that be something? "Frank, you did the right thing," she added before hanging up. Inside the house, the quiet felt new, not threatening, not heavy, just quiet. 2 days later, Megan sat at my dining table, her laptop open, a binder full of documents spread in front of her. Afternoon light cut across the wood grain. "Okay," she said, adjusting her glasses, "all long-term security measures are finalized. The trust is protected under the judge's order. Assets secured. No loopholes. No way for Logan to contest anything without triggering legal consequences." I nodded, but a dull ache rose behind my ribs. Hard to believe it came to this. Megan softened her tone. "Frank, he tried to rewrite your will. He filed a petition calling you incompetent. He opened a life insurance policy that paid out if you died early. These protections aren't extreme, they're necessary." I swallowed. "I know, just wish the world was kinder." She pushed a final set of forms toward me. "These update your powers of attorney and designate only people you trust. Logan is fully removed." My signature came out cleaner than it had months ago. A small victory in pen strokes. Over the next several days, I found myself reaching out to old friends, people I'd lost touch with while trying to manage the chaos Logan brought into my life. I met two former firefighting buddies at a dine. Off the highway, the place smelled like burnt coffee and fried onions. "You look good, Frank," one of them said. I laughed under my breath. Feels like someone's finally stopped standing on my chest. We talked for an hour, about the past, about the mess, about life moving on whether we wanted to or not. When I drove home afterward, the night didn't feel heavy. It felt clear. Then the messages started. Blocked number, but obviously Logan. "You're ruining everything. You've been manipulated. You'll regret cutting me out. And then, enjoy dying alone." The old pain flickered up, but it didn't swallow me. I read the messages once, then blocked the number again, permanently this time. As for Tara, she evaporated. Her car gone, house dark. A for rent sign appeared where her flower pots used to sit, running like guilt with legs. In the evenings, my house settled back into itself. I cooked real meals. I walked the neighborhood. I slept more than I worried. The quiet didn't feel like danger anymore. It felt like the first fragile layer of peace. A peace I knew might not last, but one I was finally strong enough to protect. The strange thing about peace is how quiet it is. For so long my days had been filled with noise, even when the house itself was silent. Lawyers' voices in my head, Logan's accusations replaying on a loop, worst-case scenarios marching through my imagination at 3 in the morning. But as the weeks passed after the ruling, that noise started to thin out. Not vanish exactly, just move to the background. And into that space, little things began to slip back in. Things I'd dropped without even noticing. One morning, I opened the hall closet to grab a jacket and saw my old camera bag sitting there, half buried under a jumble of forgotten stuff. I'd stopped taking pictures years ago, somewhere between my wife's illness and Logan's first major financial disaster. I pulled the bag out, wiped the dust off, and unzipped it. The camera was still there, heavier than I remembered, cool in my hands. That weekend, I took it out to the park by the river. The trees were bare, the water steel gray, but there was something beautiful in the starkness. I walked the trail slowly, lifting the camera, framing shots, light on wet branches, reflections on the water, an old bench with initials carved into it. My knees ached, my breath puffed white in the air, but I felt present, like I was actually inside my life again instead of watching it from a distance. The next project waited in the garage. My old firefighting gear had sat there for years. Helmet, boots, tools I'd kept more out of sentiment than sense. One rainy afternoon, I laid everything out on the workbench. The smell of rubber and dust and old leather filled the space. I ran my hand over the helmet, the scratches and dings like a map of old battles. There was no point letting all this rot in a corner. I called the local firefighting training school, half expecting them to brush me off. Instead, the director practically lit up over the phone. "You're a retired firefighter donating original gear. Absolutely, we'd be honored." Driving over with the boxes in the back of the truck felt different from driving to court. There was no dread, just a steady, quiet sense of purpose. A couple of younger recruits helped unload the equipment. One of them picked up my old helmet and whistled. "This yours?" he asked. "Used to be," I said. He smiled. "We'll put it to good use, sir." For the first time in a long time, I walked away from a building feeling like I'd added something to the world instead of defending myself from it. Not long after, Dr. Grant called. Her voice had that brisk, no-nonsense tone she used when she was trying not to sound too excited. "Your blood pressure looks better, your labs are improving," she said. "I've been thinking, we run community health seminars at the clinic, especially for older folks. People listen more when it's not just doctors talking. Would you consider helping? Sharing your experience, talking about stress, about advocating for yourself?" "Me?" I asked, surprised. "I'm hardly a poster child for good decisions." "Exactly," she said. "You learned the hard way. That's valuable. Let people see it's okay to say no, even to family, when your health is on the line. I thought about all the times I'd stayed quiet, let things slide, let myself be worn down. Maybe, I said slowly, yeah, maybe that's worth doing. We penciled in a date. I hung up and stared at the calendar on my fridge. For the first time in months, the marks on it weren't court dates or medical tests. They were things I actually chose. A pattern began to form. Mornings started with a walk, short at first, then a little longer. Afternoons were for small projects, fixing a loose step, cleaning out a drawer, sorting old photos. Evenings were for calls with friends, or just sitting with a book instead of staring blankly at the TV. I wasn't filling time to avoid fear anymore. I was choosing what went into each day, one deliberate decision at a time. The neighbors noticed before I did. Mrs. Hand from across the street waved one day as I was raking leaves. "You're out and about more, Mr. Mercer," she called. "You look good." "Trying not to fossilize in my chair," I joked. Another neighbor stopped me on my walk. "Saw you heading out pretty early yesterday," he said. "Good to see you moving again." They said it casually, but the message landed. I wasn't just surviving drama anymore. I was visible in my own life. Then Megan came by one evening with a folder tucked under her arm, and that focused look in her eyes. "I've been thinking," she said, setting the folder on my coffee table. "You've got your immediate protections in place, but what about long-term impact? What happens with your money and assets when you're gone, beyond just who gets what?" I raised an eyebrow, thought we already covered that. "We covered defense," she explained. "This is a fence, a legacy fund, something tied to what matters to you, firefighting, maybe, or helping families under financial pressure so they don't end up like you and Logan did." We talked for a long time, not about how to keep vultures away, but about what I actually believed in. Eventually, she sketched out the framework for a small fund. Modest, focused, meant to outlive me in a way that wasn't about my name on a plaque, but about real help for real people. When she left, the house felt different. Not bigger, not fuller, just aligned. Later that night, I sat in my favorite chair with the lamp on low, listening to the hum of the heater. Around me were the small signs of a life being rebuilt. Camera on the side table, walking shoes by the door, paperwork neatly stacked instead of scattered in panic. My heart ached when I thought of Logan, of what he'd done, of what we'd both lost. That grief didn't evaporate, but layered beneath it was something solid and quiet. I'd been betrayed, I'd been targeted, I'd been counted out. And I was still here. For the first time, the fact that I survived all of it didn't feel like an accident. It felt like something I'd chosen, over and over, even when I didn't realize it. I let that sink in, let myself feel the small, unfamiliar warmth of pride. The question that lingered, though, as I looked around at this life no longer overshadowed, was simple and impossible to ignore. Now that I'd finally taken it back, what exactly was I going to do with the rest of it? The morning light came in soft through the kitchen window as I sat at the dining table with my estate documents spread neatly in front of me. For the first time in months, the papers didn't feel like threats. They felt like choices, my choices. Choices I was finally making without pressure, fear, or anyone circling my life like a vulture. It was strange how steady my hands felt as I picked up the pen. Maybe that was what freedom looked like in real time, steady hands and a quiet house. Megan sat across from me, her laptop open, glasses perched low on her nose. "All right," she said, scrolling. "This is the final estate plan, not the reactive one, not the emergency version. This is the one you create when you're living on your own terms." There was pride in her voice, subtle but unmistakable. "Good," I said. "I'm ready." We moved through each section carefully. The trust was solid, reinforced by Judge Reed's ruling. Every asset, house, pension, savings, was protected under layers of legal clarity. And then came the most important part, the distributions. "You get to designate what really matters," Megan said. "No pressure, just honesty." I started with the firefighting training school I had visited weeks earlier. They get a donation, I said, enough to help a recruit who can't afford gear. Megan typed it in without hesitation. Next came the community center, the local medical aid charity, small causes that had quietly kept people afloat. It felt grounding, choosing them, like I was finally giving my life story a direction instead of letting others carve it up. And individuals, Megan asked gently. I thought of Dr. Grant, her unwavering support, her clear testimony in court, the steady way she refused to let me give up. I thought of Megan, how she had fought for me, believed me, guided me, protected every detail of my future. You both get small gifts, I said. Nothing flashy, just thanks that won't disappear when I'm gone. She nodded, her expression softening. We'll structure them carefully. Nothing anyone could accuse as undue influence. Then came Logan's section, the part of the document that had once held his name as naturally as my own signature. Megan rotated the laptop so I could see clearly. This clause removes Logan entirely, she said. No partial rights, no residual inheritance, no loopholes. Can he contest it? I asked. Not successfully, she replied. The fraud ruling closed every door. I studied his name for a long moment. The grief hit. But it was clean now, like a scar instead of an open wound. Remove him, I said quietly. Megan tapped the keys. His name vanished from the document, leaving behind empty space that somehow felt honest. When the legal part was done, Megan slid a blank sheet of paper in front of me. This is optional, she said. Some people leave a personal letter explaining their choices. It can give closure to them or to you. No pressure. That night I wrote, not with anger, not with revenge, just truth. I wrote about the forged will, the insurance policy, the attempt to declare me incompetent. I wrote about trust shattered and boundaries crossed. I wrote that removing him wasn't punishment, it was protection. For my life, my peace, and the legacy I wanted to leave behind. When I finished, I folded the letter and sealed it. The next morning I gave it to Megan. Keep it with the documents, I said. Open it after I'm gone. She accepted it with both hands, a gesture gentler than I expected. We drove to her office, where she stored everything in the firm's vault, secure, sealed, final. I watched the reinforced door close and felt something inside me settle. Later that afternoon, I visited Dr. Grant. She reviewed my new blood work, eyebrows lifting. Frank, your numbers look better than they have in years, she said. Lower stress, stronger vitals, you're healing. Feels strange, I admitted. Good, but strange. That's what peace does to a body, she replied with a smile. Don't underestimate it. When I got home, I found the last envelope waiting on my table, the upcoming court date, the final hearing, the one that would officially close the book on everything Logan tried to take from me. I ran my finger along the edge of the notice. No dread, no shaking hands, just a steady readiness. The next time I walked into that courthouse, I wouldn't walk in as a man defending his future. I'd walk in as someone who had already reclaimed it. The last hearing felt quieter than all the ones before it. I sat at the front table with my hands folded, no lawyer at my side this time, just Megan behind me and Dr. Grant in the second row. Judge Reed flipped through the thick stack of trust documents one final time, the rustle of paper sounding louder than the heating vents. When he looked up, his expression was firm but not unkind, the kind of face you see on someone who has already made up his mind. Mr. Mercer, he said, voice steady, this court has reviewed the findings of fraud, the medical reports, and the trust language your counsel prepared. We find you competent, we find your planning reasonable, and we find no grounds to deny what you've asked. He turned slightly toward the gallery. Logan sat there alone, jaw tight, suit wrinkled. The chair beside him was empty. Tara hadn't bothered to come. No perfume, no dramatic entrance, just absence where she used to stand and push him forward. It is therefore ordered, Judge Reed continued, that the Mercer Living Trust is approved in full. All protections described within it are affirmed and placed on the record. During your lifetime, Mr. Mercer, your assets will remain under your control, and after your passing they will be distributed exactly as you've laid out. He let that sit for a moment before adding, in addition, due to prior misconduct, your son, Logan Mercer, is removed from any present or future claim to this estate. He has no legal standing to direct, control, or benefit from your property going forward. I didn't look back at Logan right away. I listened to the words instead, letting them sink in like cold water over a burn. No standing, no access, no more pretending his greed was just confusion. When I finally turned my head, his eyes were locked on the judge, wide and disbelieving, the way someone looks when they realize the elevator cable has already snapped. His mouth opened like he might object, then shut again. With no lawyer, no wife, and no leverage, there was nothing for him to do but sit there and watch the door close on the future he tried to steal. Judge Reed signed the last page, passed it to the clerk, and lifted his gavel. "The trust is approved. This matter is concluded," he said, bringing it down once. The sharp crack echoed off the wood panels and then faded, taking months of tension with it. When I stood, I realized my shoulders weren't curled in like they had been the first time I walked into this room. My back straightened almost on its own. I was still an old man, still stiff at the knees, but I felt taller than I had in years. Megan stepped to my side, closing her briefcase. "You're done, Frank," she said softly. "For real this time." A moment later, Dr. Grant joined us near the aisle, coat over her arm, eyes searching my face like she was checking vital signs. The three of us moved toward the doors together, past the empty defense table, past the rows of benches that had once felt like a jury judging my worth as a father. Logan stayed seated as we passed. Said, I felt his stare on the side of my face but didn't turn to meet it. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said in petitions and court transcripts. For years, I'd bent myself into knots trying to justify, excuse, or fix him. Now the judge's order stood where my excuses used to be. We pushed through the heavy double doors and stepped into the corridor. The air out there felt cooler, cleaner, like someone had opened a window in a stuffy room. Megan walked just ahead, already talking about where the certified copies would be stored. Dr. Grant stayed close to my shoulder, a quiet presence. At the far end of the hall, the glass entrance threw pale winter light across the floor in long, bright stripes. Each step toward it felt new. Frank breathed deeply, finally living a life no longer owned by anyone's expectations.